This is Dylan Lawrence Moore of Freedom, Washington. Tonight we have a very special guest, James Miller, former project manager and engineer at Boeing, and researcher and expert in voter fraud, specifically in Washington state. James filed the first writ of mandamus in state history against Secretary of State Kim Wyman, and is on the show to share his firsthand experience on how he uncovered the way our electronic voting systems in Washington state function, and how voting totals are more often than not fraudulently tabulated. So this is going to be really, 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 really big, and you're going to want to stay tuned if you want to know how Washington state's electronic voting machines can be secretly manipulated to swing elections. And James and I will also be discussing, the steps that are going to be needed to rectify the situation in Washington state. And I really want to emphasize, and I think James also is going to want to emphasize, that this is a problem that can be fixed, and James has already taken the first steps in fixing it. So thank you, James, so much for making time to chat with me so we could put this on the internet. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on your video blog.
Awesome. So the first question I have, and I'm sure a lot of people have, is what is a writ of mandamus?
Writ of mandamus is simply a citizen's right to ask or demand, according to our Constitution, that the state or local authority act and perform their duties as described in their own laws or under the Constitution, and in this case, the state of Washington. So a mandamus is it's a powerful instrument built into our Constitution that says that a citizen can appeal to the justice system, not the House or the Senate, but to the justice system, that the elected officials perform their duties as described under RCW or through the Washington Administrative. And you do that. What I found out, what was really interesting, and I had to file it twice, all mandamus are filed in superior courts in your local county, but this particular writ has to be filed directly to the Supreme Court because I'm asking an elected official, in this case Kim Wyman, to perform her duties as described by the law and by her own administrative code. So it was a two-step process for me. Mm-hmm. I'm not a lawyer. I'm an engineer. Right.
And then, actually, can you tell us a little bit more about your background? So what we're going to get into, the specifics, the gears operating inside the voting machines, basically. And I read some of the files that you filed against Kim Wyman, and you get very, very specific in terms of what you want to see regarding these voting machines. So what is your the background of your expertise that allows you to really, ask these poignant questions and make these poignant demands on our elected officials to say, look, I really want to see how these voting machines work. You have to show me this.
I think my training really started not only in college, but the time that I went back to school to get a business degree, a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, was at the same time that computer technology was just booming in the early 90s. And right away, I recognized that knowing how to program and to operate computer technology was going to be important. So I bought my first computer and I put it together and I built it and I began to learn to program. And so over that period of time, that served me very well in terms of getting jobs, which I ended up at Boeing. And at Boeing, I was taught system engineering and processes, very succinct processes, which are necessary to maintain the safety of flight and to make sure that manufacturing, suppliers, and software was written in accordance to the rules that maintained Boeing's ability to manufacture according to the FAA. And these rules are very strict and very stringent. Many engineers work together as teams to make sure that failure modes analysis is done properly, without emotion, just mathematically and through good engineering best practices, so that when something is committed to being manufactured, it is safe within the confines as defined by the FAA. And, that's a very generic description, but also Boeing trained me to do data analysis in SQL Server. And so between systems analysis, programming, database design, the understanding of failure modes methodology, and I'm not an expert, I'm just saying that, if you're in the engineering community, you understand these, and you understand these very strict processes that have to be adhered to ensure that Boeing doesn't lose its license to manufacture airplanes. And everyone marches to that tune, not only to schedule, but to the quality necessary to maintain that strict process analysis. So in the process of doing that, you are naturally become trained into thinking about processes, step A, step B, step C. Let's see the software, if it's a program, let's see the software in between it, let's see the documentation, let's see what's been tested, and what was the testing modality that you went through to ensure that what you are telling us is actually true.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of my background. I have training in project management. I have 2 master's degrees, a degree in chemistry, business administration, lots of education, lots of experience.
And I'd like to emphasize, so you're talking about having a process and incredibly strict systems and processes in place in order to make sure that, the software is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And particularly with Boeing, if you don't do it right, a plane's going to fall out of the sky.
737 MAX just recently.
So
this is perfect, correct?
What do you mean?
If you don't follow the processes, airplanes fall out of the sky.
Exactly. So, but my point being, not only did you go through these processes, you had a incredibly big gamble if for some reason you didn't follow them, because people are literally going to die and millions of dollars are going to be wasted on this incredibly expensive piece of machinery. So you're able to take that training and that expertise and say, okay, let me analyze Washington State, Secretary of State, how you're using these voting systems. So if we could transition into what's going on here in the state, first, can you give me what you would consider is the general idea of what's wrong with the voting machines in Washington State?
Yes, actually, the technology is a huge background going back decades, but we won't get into that. But essentially what happens is mail-in ballots are sent to either a sub-precinct or to the county auditor, and they're scanned, and those ballots are not counted by humans, but they're counted by scanning machines. And that data from those scanning machines is then sent to a tally computer. That tally computer is updated prior to each election. And I'm assuming, because I was allowed to see the code, that they put the new names in candidates, etc. And it's updated. And so I asked, well, who updates that? Who does that? And is it a third party? Is it the county auditor? Is it the state? And I discovered that it was a third party. And I asked, well, okay, let me see their certifications, which was denied. And then I asked, well, let me see the code so that we can compare updates, previous. Is there more than just the names of the candidates? What else is going on? And I was denied that process. I had to submit a request, a PR, public record request, to the Superior Court judge, which was denied. And I persisted, and the prosecuting attorney locally in Oakland County said, well, you can do that, but we'll have to charge you $400 an hour, and we don't know how many hours it will cost, and you will have to write the check prior to seeing the code. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist or a Boeing engineer to see that they could give me any code and I wouldn't get really what I expected. And with any turpitude or any sense of, I could be looking at flight data from going to Apollo 13. There was no way to compare.
Mm-hmm.
So the conclusion is that the tally computer, which is updated by someone certified from the federal government, the Department of Homeland Security, which is an interference in itself into states' rights, 10th Amendment, they're actually certifying that our process is okay, which is an interference.
What are the names of these third parties that you came across that are updating the software?
I don't have their names in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
They were provided. I'm sorry, I don't have them.
Okay, that's fine.
But the machines, there's various machines that are used in the state of Washington, but the major one is Hart InterCivic. And from the information that I do remember and was given is that third party is located in Texas. And that's where their technical data people reside. But I don't know who they are. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they're doing. I don't know anything about Hart InterCivic. I know quite a bit about their technology that they're using. That's another long story.
Mm-hmm.
So in my own mind, it created a tremendous amount of doubt. So I was denied the ability to actually inspect and look at the code. I don't know what it was written in. I'm assuming that it was probably C++. I can look at that. I understand that code, but I was not ever able to look at it. And this is after many conversations and email exchanges with not only Kim Wyman, but her technical director. And after about 2 weeks of email conversations, they then simply refused to talk with me. So my conclusion is this. The tally computer that tabulates all of the outcomes for all elections in Washington state is hidden in secret. It is not available to be checked. There is no human intervention. We don't know what's going on. It is updated before every election in every county or sub-precinct prior to every election by a third party of whom we do not know. We have no control. Controlled by a federal government certification for that third party, of which I can't look at. They won't give it to me. So our entire process, technologically based on computers, is hidden in secret. And my conclusion is this, based on my, almost 20 years of experience with Boeing and looking at processes, including failure modes analysis, is that the system is broken. This airplane won't fly. It shouldn't fly. It's grounded until we look at it just in the same manner as the 737 MAX was grounded, and we need to look at the software. The election process in the state of Washington is fraudulent and is broken in the same manner.
Do you want to give a little detail how you came across this information, the story from the beginning?
Well, I didn't set out actually to do this. This wasn't my intent. I was actually doing a historical research project with a friend in Columbus, Ohio, Leader Technology, on the history of how voting machines were developed. Because and this person is a civil engineer, and so we have the same mindset, is, well, where did these machines came from? We hear a lot of really bad information. They've been hacked. They can be hacked by a 12-year-old. They can be hacked
by a monkey. I've heard that one.
And so what is the process? Where did these people come from? Who are the owners? Who owns the stock? Who leads these companies? What are their names? And going through that whole process, I arrived at the conclusion that I really don't trust, and this is from a Boeing trained analyst and also from a self-taught open source programmer, is that I really am now completely and totally skeptical of this process. So what I did was, in order to clarify it, I sent a public records request to the local auditor asking for the entire process. And that was denied, and I said, well, you really can't deny that. That's public information, so you have to provide it. And this went on for months. And finally, the prosecuting attorney for Okanagan County, I'll leave out his name, he's no longer here, he quit shortly after all of this. And I asked, he asked me what I wanted this information for, and I basically stated that, well, I'm just curious because I don't understand the process, and as a programmer, maybe I would like to write a better program, and so I would like to know how to do this. So what is the process, and can I look at the code, or can I have all the documents that the state of Washington follows process-wise? And they came kicking and screaming to giving me of the documents which describe the process, and I spent about a week analyzing them. And then I realized that, wow, this information from the Optech scanners is transferred on a thumb drive to the Tally computer. So then I asked what happens on the Tally computer, which was a part of the process. And to my horror, I discovered that there is actually on the Tally computer itself, and this is in every county because Kim Wyman has created a uniform process, there is no human intervention or introspection into it. And from my friend in Ohio, where they actually documented on similar systems what is called fraction magic. Fraction magic is a statistical algorithm created based on historical information, where you can take one standard deviation of voting history by county, and through the analysis of variance called ANOVA, which is just a standard statistical process, you can back into the votes necessary for a particular candidate to win ahead of the actual election. And if you have free access to that computer and no one ever looks at it, that third-party person can come in, update with their patch, and put that fraction magic onto the computer and predetermine the outcome before anything ever happens.
So I want to stop right there and let's go over that again, and I want to see if I could translate that into some more common terms, because that was big and wild. So the first part was, okay, we get all these votes, They go to the local precinct or whatever the other option was. They get tabulated in a computer. So they're fed through a computer and they get counted up.
Through scanners.
Through a scanner, and they get counted up.
And what's really important, Dylan, is that people from both parties sit behind a glass booth for the process and watch the hired civil servants feed the scanners, the ballots into these scanners.
Right. And then, however, once it's fed to the scanner, it gets transferred to a USB drive. I got that right? And that USB drive goes to the actual tallying computer, which we have no access to whatsoever.
That's correct. It's updated before every election.
So from the last time that human eyes are on it is when we see these pieces of paper going into the scanner. Once it hits that USB drive, we have no idea what's going on. And then to compound that issue, once it goes into the computer, we doubly don't have any idea what's going on. And what you're telling me is you figured out what's going on, and that the way that they're predetermining these votes is they're looking to past elections and saying, okay, how did the votes land on the past election, and how can we graph statistical error? And as long as we fit within that statistical error, we make up votes that fit somewhere within that statistical error, it's not going to throw any red flags, and no one's going to say, hey, wait, we need a manual recount.
You got it. That's how it's done.
I'm
flabbergasting, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is flabbergasting double, because I mean, you told me this in private conversation before we even recorded this, and just hearing it again, I'm just shaking my head, going, I don't even know what to say.
They cannot refute what I'm saying, and they cannot confirm it without revealing the code.
So let's. I want to bring up. Let's see if we can zoom back out and look at the basics of this. So we've got this idea of the writ of mandamus, which I wasn't aware is actually something that's within our state constitution. Did I hear that correctly from you? So the citizens of Washington State have the constitutional right to this thing called the writ of mandamus, which, when filed, you could say, "Hey, public official, per the Constitution or per the law, which is Revised Code of Washington in Washington, or WAC, which is the Washington Administrative Code, you are obligated to do X." This writ of mandamus says, I am ordering you, I am demanding that you do X, and they have to do it because that's their job.
Right.
Now, the Secretary of State, who is the elected authority, her name is Kim Wyman. I don't know how long she's been in office. She's a Republican, and she's been in office for quite some time, is my understanding. And you wrote she is responsible for basically the entire voting system in Washington State. She has to follow presumably the Washington State Constitution. She has to do what the Washington State legislature tells her, and the legislature writes the RCW, and based on the Constitution and the RCW, she is the person who actually writes the WAC, the code, the Washington Administrative Code that supposedly gets done what the legislator told her to do through the RCW. And so you are using the writ of mandamus to say, okay, you need to tell me what you're doing per law, and you're getting flat out denied.
Correct.
And you were able to, and could you say this detail again? How were you able to figure out about the fraction magic?
Fraction magic is basically an assumption on my part, but it has been tried in the Midwest in the 2012 and the 2016 election, and was proven to be in use.
Can you tell a little more about that?
The math formula exists, and you can actually download the algorithm. It exists, and you can see how it works. It has been proven to exists to have been used across multiple states in the 2012 and the 2016 election.
That would be something for a future video to definitely follow up on. And so what you're saying is because it was used in these other states and because they're flat out refusing to show you how these computers work, which if that's the case, we can only assume nefarious business. If that's the technique that's being used in other parts of the country, your assumption is that it's a safe assumption that is the same one that's being used here.
Correct. There is this, and this is the beauty of the system, and I will have to hand it to the people who gave it to Kim Wyman, because I am absolutely certain she did not come up with the schema. She is simply the agent who is implementing it. Is that it is clever beyond belief, and from an engineering perspective, I have to give credit to him. It is clever. But here's the problem. Article 1, Section 19 in the State of Washington Constitution says that no one or no entity, no organization, civil or military, shall interfere with the right to suffrage, because it is the sacred right to vote. It is the absolute sacred protection of our republic, that the people's will, their authority, be passed to the people that they elect, their servants, the public servants, and those servants do the will of the people. By subverting this as cleverly and as evilly as has been done, the people have lost the sacred right to suffrage, that is, free voting and secret ballot without interference, so that their will be expressed in the tenets or the halls of self-governance, which is the basic foundation for our republic to function properly. And they have undermined this and they've destroyed it. There is no forensic evidence because it doesn't exist, and that's the clever ability of it. So I have arrived at this conclusion, this analysis. I have arrived at it by projecting a high probability that this is how Washington is control of the Washington state, the budget, the House, the Senate, is being slowly shifted to the left or to the globalist agenda. And even though the state is becoming, by populace, more and more conservative and more constitutional, and yet it is not being reflected among the people. And you asked me how I arrived and why I went down this path, is because one of the questions was, well, how is it possible that the will of the people is being subverted? And so I wanted to explore that, and through just through the engineering friends that I have working in other places of the country who have been doing similar things, we can only conclude, because this process is secret and hidden and no one can actually look at it, and they can destroy any evidence at any time, that it's the wrong process.
Well, and then if for some reason you were wrong, the ease of which you could be proven wrong would simply be to release the code, right?
And they won't do it, and they never will. So therefore, they can neither refute or affirm, which means my conclusion is that the right of suffrage, the sacred right of suffrage, is so large and so huge, in the billions, if not trillions of dollars, and the outcomes of humans, businesses, corporation, local governance, is being determined by a few people. This is not the definition of a republic, And federal law says that every state shall be guaranteed a republic form of government. And we do not have this because what we have is total and complete tyranny.
Yeah.
They can't deny it, and they can't affirm that I'm correct.
So let's continue that idea. Can you tell me a little bit of what you found about who Kim Wyman is, and possibly even more importantly, who our Attorney General Bob Ferguson is?
I have not done the research on Bob Ferguson.
Got it.
I've done a great deal of research on Kim Wyman, and it's frightening, actually. Kim Wyman, even though she's a Republican, and I'm often asked the question, well, if she is doing these things, why is she constantly being attacked by the Democrats? And people are running against her all the time. But here's the curious, she's never defeated. And my answer is, well, she has no fear, and they can, methinks that they protest too much. It's a great smokescreen.
And then especially if you're the person controlling the votes in a corrupt system, well, of course, you're the first person to win, right?
Right. And Kim Wyman is a member of the Aspen Institute. You can go online, Google Kim Wyman Aspen Institute, and read her bio. And then do some introspection into what the Aspen Institute is. The Aspen Institute is primarily funded by George Soros. Who's George Soros? George Soros is the person who, through basic cheating and various insider trading, made an instant fortune by tricking the currency arbitrage of the United Kingdom, or the UK, England, and overnight made, I forget, it's around $2 billion, just instantaneously.
Wow.
Almost broke the bank of England in this currency arbitrage. We know that it's statistically impossible for that to happen unless there's insider trading. So why would they do that? Well, they needed to give him lots of money. And what was he to do with this money? Well, he funds many things, but one of the projects that he funds is election fraud through putting people in place, not only in the United States, but throughout the world, so that they can run counter revolutions and overthrow the current governance, the self-governance of the people. So when you look at her bio, who she's associated with, she is, in fact, our conclusion is, she is a George Soros agent who uses his money, his influence, to overthrow government. And the process is not guns, it's election machines. And that's what we have. Mm-hmm. And that's what's going on. And that's our conclusion. And I swear to God, in my soul, that I'm right.
So, I still want to talk about Bob Ferguson, though. Because even if you haven't done the research on him, you have interacted with him, correct?
That is correct. Bob responded when I wrote my writ and submitted it to the Supreme Court of Washington. Most of those writs are given to a person, a clerk, and they write them. I found it very curious that he took this on personally. He did this himself. This was not written. It was signed by Bob Ferguson. And he basically said that mandamus was not the correct methodology to correct what I deemed as wrong, because the revised Code of Washington voted by the legislature, and this is really important, says that Kim Wyman is acting per the Constitution, although I argue that the entire basis of it is not, according to Article 1, Section 19, that the right of suffrage belongs to the people. But nevertheless, Bob wrote in a letter to me, and I have it, said that mandamus is not correct, that there are other means by which to have or correct Wyman's process.
Did he say what those other means are?
He did not. He said there were alternatives. So I actually do not know what those alternatives are, and I have discussed this with several lawyers, constitutional lawyers, and we can't actually discern what those processes are.
So
at this point, I don't know.
So I guess a more probing question to that is, was the writ of mandamus actually the correct tool to use? And he's just denying it, trying to create a smokescreen saying, oh, look anywhere but here.
Well, my premise is this. Article 1, Section 19, that no authority or organization shall interfere with the right to suffrage. And yet we have given to the state the entire authority, which is civil, backed by military, to do all of the election for the people. But our Constitution says that that is not proper, that it belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, or to the state, or to the civil servants. It belongs to the people. So the people must organize themselves to have an election. The language is very plain.
Yeah. Well, and then, you say that your argument is that it violates Article 1, Section 19. I don't even see how it really needs an argument, because it's so logically obvious if there's no chain of custody. And by that I mean, once it's scanned and it goes into that USB drive, there's no human eyes on it from that point forward. And if we're unable to see the code in the machines, like you said, you can't even figure out who's updating the code. It's a third party. We don't know what they're getting paid. We don't know anything about them.
My conclusion is that everything that happens prior to that tally computer is all a magic show. If that computer is updated 3 weeks ahead of all of the ballots being sent out and then collected, the date that that computer is updated is the date that the election has been held.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is a prevarication. It's a magic show. I know that sounds harsh, but that's the only conclusion I can arrive at.
Well, and then, even if it's, like I said, even if it's not the correct conclusion, show it to us, Kim Wyman.
You have that right, and she will not. So,
let's shift this conversation into what you think can be done about this. So, right now, we've got Bob Ferguson saying the writ of mandamus is not the correct tool, which my spidey senses are suspecting that maybe it actually is the right tool, and he's just playing smokescreen. And particularly if you've talked to multiple lawyers, and the lawyers are all going, I don't know what else he could possibly be referring to. Keeping that in mind, what do you feel is the proper way to go about, I guess first and foremost, scaring these people into being more careful with these voting machines?
The tech. First of all, we should not be using any technology whatsoever in the tallying of the votes of any kind. You should not be using anything, no spreadsheets, nothing. Now, I've developed a process of making this all up front and very plain using internet IP cameras,
Mm-hmm.
and where humans divided into two groups, no different than taking an inventory at a large warehouse. You have one team that counts everything, you have team B that counts another, and they compare the results, and you keep counting until you arrive at a logical conclusion. That should be done with ballots by humans, and it should be all done under the introspection of IP cameras, and any totals that are sent to Kim Wyman to write on a whiteboard is all done under an IP camera, which is very simple, and that's what we're using now. I think it cost me $20. And they're spending millions, tens, if not hundreds of millions on these machines. And what's the cost of a whiteboard and an IP camera and a laptop going to a public website that I could create that anybody in the country can dial into? We broadcast. And we email using a hash code, which is done with a zip file, both a verbal and a video, because everyone is watching this. When Precinct or Okanagan County writes on President Trump 10,000 votes, Biden 5,000 votes, hopefully. That is on that public address. 1 million people have watched that. They can't refute it.
Mm-hmm.
But I also make a phone call to Kim Wyman from Okanagan County if I'm the auditor and say the vote is 10,000, 5,000. And through the IP camera, the address of the Secretary of State, we watch her write 10,000, 5,000. So now we have, and then she calls back on another channel and confirms it. We record that, and it's done. We put all of those ballots in a canvas bag, and we put the tally into it that was hand counted. We seal it, and all of the people who counted it sign a certificate that says if I cheated or it's found I've lied or anything, I get charged, I fined $1 million and 10 years in prison. It's all put, and that bag is stored for 2 elections.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's basically the process that we should be going through, plus voter ID, and people should be going to a polling place.
Correct.
Like we used to do before I had white hair, and voted. And so I saw my neighbor there. I knew my neighbors. I knew the people who were voting. And it was a community effort rather than this hidden and secret process. It was much better, more congenial in all aspects. And if you have the IP cameras, as I've described with whiteboards, and some hash files sent back and forth, they simply can't be corrupted. And for those who don't know what a hash file is, I send it in an email with some that has the numbers in it. And if anyone opens it or a third party hacks it or tries to send it, if it's in any way touched other than what it's intended, you can't open it, and it's destroyed. It destroys itself.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't mess with it. And it takes a password over a cell phone in order to open it.
Right.
So
two-factor authorization.
That is correct. We don't need scanning machines. We don't need tally computers. We don't need anything that we're spending millions and millions of dollars on to have a voting process. Further, the laws of chain of custody in criminal court says that if I cannot determine without fail who handed or where the evidence in a criminal case was protected or how it was handled. Let's say it was a knife. If I lose chain of custody, it's thrown out. I can't use that in court.
I'm happy you brought this up because I read this in the documents that you filed. I want to emphasize what James is saying here is that if we apply the rules of evidence that are used in a courtroom to what's going on in this voting tabulation, which is we got the scan, it goes from the scan to the USB drive, the scanner to the USB drive, from the USB drive to these voting machines that we know nothing about. this violates the chain of custody. I mean, 7 ways to Sunday, because we're not able to track with human eyes what happened with these votes. If this, if we were to bring this into court, that would that evidence, so to speak, would have to get thrown out because the chain of custody was violated, right?
Right. Now the auditors will argue. They say, well, these people register and they have a signature that they sign when they register. So when they vote, we compare their signature on their mail-in ballot to the signature when they register.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can tell you, I've looked at a lot of data, and I've done a lot of data entry in my days. And after 3 hours of data entry, I need a lot of coffee. and I do not trust. So Kim Wyman is saying that our entire right to suffrage is completely dependent upon the civil servants making a human comparative analysis from one signature to say that that ballot is good or it's bad. And my contention is that's a failed process. That airplane, Part 25, fails. That airplane crashes when it takes off.
Mm-hmm.
It is not thorough. It fails in every category of human logic. A human being cannot look at 50,000 signatures and after 2 hours, excuse my language, but it's WTF, that's close enough. And that's a bad ballot. And that's what our right to suffrage is dependent upon. The ability of a few civil servants, not bipartisan chain of custody, to determine whether a vote is good or bad. That's not right. It is completely wrong.
I love your idea for how the voting system should work, and I presume it's solid if we take your background as this person who managed systems to look for failure on airplanes for Boeing. However, if we adjust the conversation to acknowledge the fact that we're less than 50 days from the election.
So what can we do?
So what can we do? Because obviously what you're suggesting requires laws to change, and that doesn't happen quickly. What can we do in the next 50 days?
We must all write to Kim Wyman, and we must demand that, at a minimum, in order for fraction magic to work, in order for any standard deviation to work, it can only assume a certain percentage of the votes. That standard deviation can only be so wide. So let's say that every auditor or every sub-precinct where counties are divided into sub-precinct like King, Pierce, Snohomish, that they must hand count 25% at a minimum, every vote, and they must be compared to the scanned tally computer count. Now here's what really has to happen. The sheriff in every county, along with a bipartisan committee of citizens, as soon as the thumb drive from the scanning is put into the tally computer and it automatically tabulates, the sheriff or that committee, they seal that computer. They put a plastic bag over it, put duct tape around it, and put their seal on it, and it's done. Now they do 25%. They count all 25% of votes of all precincts in every county, and they compare it then to what that tally computer did, and now you would figure out what the delta is, and you would very quickly figure out that fraction magic is actually being used, not in every precinct, but just enough for the candidate of choice to be predetermined.
Explain to the non-engineers who may be viewing this what delta is.
The difference. Simply the difference between one count to the other.
Mm-hmm.
So This way, the tally computer is frozen and the hand count then is compared to it. The tally computer, here's what's even more dumbfounding. Each auditor is required, and it's part of the program of that tally computer, to print a report before that thumb drive is sent by courier to Olympia.
Mm-hmm.
Olympia then prints the same report, and Kim Wyman is saying, oh, here it is, we have a comparison, and one confirms the other. But it's the same report, it's just a copy of the same report, and that's in the
what a dorky move. Come on.
No, that's what they're doing. That's how they're hijacking Washington State.
Okay. This whole conversation was worth it just for that last, 2 minutes of you explaining it? Of what we need to do with the current system in order to ensure that that we get, or I should say that this fraction magic or whatever the algorithm that they're using to adjust things,
correct,
doesn't occur. That's really powerful, and I'm planning on following up with you after we finish this recording about it. I'm getting to the end here with the things that I had to ask you. Was there anything else that you wanted to add before we concluded?
When I filed the writ, there was no confirmation whatsoever in the process, but now Kim has ordered, right after this, I did this, she ordered, well, maybe...
And when was this? Sorry to interrupt you. Give me some rough dates when this occurred.
2016, just before the last presidential election.
Got it. Okay.
It took me 6 months. I'm not a lawyer. So it took 6 months to get the language right.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think it was fairly good. But she's then said, after the writ and many conversations with her technical director, well, maybe we should sample a precinct. And so she was going to sample 15% of all precincts, all in every precinct, and have the auditors count them. Well, she backed way out of that as soon as the heat was off. And now the Republican Party leader in each county or precinct and the Democratic Party, they select two precincts. They select together two precincts. It's
so they could just
random number.
So they could just select the ones that aren't getting fudged with.
That, and they already know that ahead of time. So it's all just predetermined. It's all more magic. It's all magic. This whole thing is so. Once Dylan, once you see a magic and you understand how the rabbit is pulled out of the hat, you
can't unseen it.
Know it.
Yeah.
You can't not see it. That's what I'm saying. I can't unsee what I've seen.
Well, what I'm hoping from this conversation is the can't unseeing of this to as many people as possible. I guess I would say within the state or even within the country, but I guess within the world, if you're saying that this style of voting manipulation is consistent through many countries throughout the world.
It was practiced in Venezuela. It was used to overthrow the first Venezuelan government. We've traced it all the way back. We know the names all the way and who financed it. The whole story. That's another video.
That is another video.
We need people to flood Kim Wyman with emails demanding that she order all of her county auditors to count 25% of all the votes with bipartisan groups of citizens.
Can I say emails, phone calls, and office visits?
Everything. Anything that is effective.
Okay. Okay.
Now, here's another tidbit I'll just add. In the RCWs, each auditor in every county, actually it's under the WAC, has the ability to use whatever means necessary to verify the count before the canvassing committee in each county certifies the election. And they're not doing it, because in my discussion with them is that they believe that they have to follow Kim Wyman's orders, and yet under the WAC, they do not. They have in each county the discretion to do whatever means necessary to verify prior to the canvassing committee certifying the vote that the canvassing committee is not committing fraud, and no one is doing it. They're doing exactly what they're told to do.
So you're also saying that calling our county, you said auditor, right?
Correct.
Calling our county auditor might as well be on the list as calling and emailing Kim Wyman. Yes.
They should do all of that, and actually, now that you bring it up, they should find out who their members of the canvassing committee are, which generally are your county commissioners and one other person. And this should remind them that whenever they certify an election that is fraudulent, it's 10 years in jail.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to put the fear of God in these people.
There we go. This is what I'm talking about. Well, James, I can't thank you enough for agreeing to do this video with me. And I guess doing all the work that you've done so far and agreeing to do this video with me and helping get the state back together, helping bring back the state to the constitutional basis that it was framed around. You know, like all the other states and like the country itself. I mean, this problem is magnified and reflected through every other issue that we have in the country. But if the citizens of Washington can do this, it could be copied and replicated in other states. At least that's what I feel. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, and I'm sure we'll have another conversation because you had a lot of stuff up in here to share.
Thank you very much. God bless.
God bless.